Hello there, and welcome once again to the Sage's Library. Really got to learn to speak with this pipe in my mouth. I am, as always, your humble sage, Trevor DeVal. Thank you so much for joining me here. And if you do want to help support the channel, please do hit like and subscribe. Or consider joining our Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. All the details for that stuff is in the comment section below. Today, we're going to be talking about a spooky October Halloween game. It is a game that I'm actually a pretty big fan of, although I'm a very, very late comer to it. That game is Vampire the Masquerade. Now, this is Vampire version 5, 5th edition. Now, I should tell you a few things before we get into this. Vampire the Masquerade has been around for a long time, since the 90s, published by White Wolf Games back in the day, part of the World of Darkness game lines. Now, my knowledge of Vampire the Masquerade begins and ends with this edition. In the 90s, I knew of Vampire the Masquerade as a game, but honestly, back then, while we were busy playing RuneQuest and Warhammer and Rollmaster, we heard about all of these weirdo goth kids going around LARPing with fangs, but that's what we thought Vampire the Masquerade was, and we had no real interest in that. That was weird. But as it turns out, it was just a bog standard role-playing game in addition to that, where you played a vampire. Imagine that. Again, in those days, we had no real interest, and so it never crossed my path until round about the year 2008, maybe. I came across this book, which is kind of hard to see in the light, but this is Vampire the Requiem. This is part of the new World of Darkness. Now, I had found the new World of Darkness, as I said, around 2008, and I had come across the core book, which was I think it was just called New World of Darkness. Now, for those of you who don't know much about Vampire, as I didn't, Vampire the Requiem and Vampire the Masquerade are actually two very different beasts. The base difference, I would say, or the biggest difference, I would say, is that Vampire the Requiem is more of, in their words, a personal horror game, and it's also more of a toolkit game. So in Vampire the Masquerade, there's all kinds of very, very detailed lore that's been building up over the years. Where the vampires came from, all the different clans, their history, the giant meta plot that was happening in the World of Darkness. Well, in Vampire the Requiem, none of that exists. Vampire the Requiem assumes that each GM is going to tailor their own vampire game to their table. So no one knows where the vampires came from. There's different theories, different groups, different covenants have different ideas, but no one really knows. The rules are also different too. Again, I'm not going to talk anything about previous versions of Vampire the Masquerade because I know nothing about them. Now, before we go too much further, I do want to talk to you about the edition warring that has gone on over the years. I don't know anything about this personally, but I've read and heard that there's all kinds of people that just hate the new V5 because they changed their precious rules or whatever. I don't care about any of that. The only thing I care about is Vampire the Masquerade version 5. And that said, Vampire the Masquerade version 5, always V5, that's what I'm talking about, is basically, as far as I'm concerned, two books in a way. There's the book of the rules, and then there's the book of the lore. Now, they're not organized that way. In fact, the book is barely organized at all. That's one of its chief problems. But essentially, there's the information in the book that's about the mechanics, and then the information in the book that is about the lore of Vampire the Masquerade. In my game, which I just started, I started this Vampire the Masquerade game a year or so ago. In my game, I disregard easily 95% of the lore. So everything I'm going to talk about in my experience of V5 is solely to do with the mechanics of V5, mixed with the setting implications of Vampire the Requiem. So I'm running a very different thing. I'm running sort of a hybrid game between the two. So the idea in Masquerade that all vampires come from Cain, of Cain and Abel fame, the fact that there's all of this meta plot and history and stuff, none of that exists in my game. None of it. No one knows where the vampires come from. There's speculation, but nobody really knows. But why do I like this game? When you remove all of the lore, you still have a really interesting set of mechanics. Now, the mechanics they're not really for rules lawyers, right? Like if you come from a Pathfinder 2 kind of background where everything has a very specific rule, this is not that. This is the rules in V5, as far as I'm concerned, or certainly the way I use them at the table, they are sort of a loose structure upon which to hang your game. So they do work. The core mechanic works. It's a dice pool system. You basically have a stat and a skill. Each of those stats and skills is numbered between 1 and 5. You take a stat, you take a skill, you take their numbers, and that becomes your dice pool. So if you've got a strength of 3 and a melee of 2, let's say, then you've got a dice pool of 5. You take your 5 10-sided dice and you roll, and anything that shows 6 or higher is a success. That's basically it. That's the game. You're going against difficulty numbers. That difficulty number could be based on the opponent. It could be based on a static challenge that the GM sets, whatever the case. But that's basically the game. Now, there are all kinds of little rules that come into it when it comes to the details. But basically, that's how it works. And the other thing I like about it is that because it is so fluid, you can use the system in virtually any situation that sort of makes sense. So for example, and I really like this about this system, and this system is not alone in doing this, but it really exemplifies what I'm talking about here. Let's say you're trying to, I don't know, impress a gun owner of a shop with your knowledge of weapons. Well, then you might roll your firearms skill with your intelligence because it's your knowledge of weapons, right? That's your dice pool. Whereas the same firearm skill, if used in a firefight, might be used with your composure, right? Calm under fire, composure plus firearms. So you can pick and choose based on the circumstances, and I really like that. That really maximizes the use of your stats and skills. So there's no such thing as like a god stat or a dump stat. There's no real useless skills that I've found in the game either. Everything can be applicable, especially with creative players who are seeking to use their skills in the best way possible. I really like that. But the thing that makes this vampire game different from all the other games, from what I understand, and certainly what makes it different from Vampire the Requiem, is two things. One is the concept of the hunger die, and the other thing is the delineation between vampire and human. So let's talk about the latter first. Let's talk about the delineation between vampire and human. In Vampire the Requiem, because it's a very sort of angst-ridden, introspective kind of game, what you find is, especially young vampires are quite fragile. When they use their powers, they have to roll a pool to see if the powers work, and it costs them blood points. At least I think that's how it works. It's been a long time since I've looked at it, but that's my recollection of it. And their powers don't automatically work against humans. You have to make a roll and to see if your disciplines, your vampiric disciplines work. So that makes things really tough for Vampire the Requiem vampires in a lot of cases. In V5, powers against humans almost always just work, without exception. There's no need to roll in terms of a skill pool, right? It just works. They don't get a resistance against it. And I love that. Why do I love it? Because it really, really changes the nature of the game. It changes the feel of the game. In Vampire the Requiem, you're very sort of tentative and timid, not timid, but you have to be very careful all the time when it comes to any opponents. But in Vampire the Masquerade, V5, if you're up against a gang of humans, you're going to be okay. It's very likely you're going to walk out of that encounter. So for example, in our game, at one point the young fledgling vampires got ambushed by a group of hunters on this bridge over a river. You know, these hunters were well armed, well skilled. They had 9mm pistols and shotguns and hunting rifles and Molotov cocktails. But the only thing that really affected the vampires in the course of the fight was the Molotov cocktail. When one of the hunters threw it at the pickup truck that one of the vampires was in, that vampire failed a fear frenzy test and dove out of the truck and into the river to escape. But the other vampires were able to very, very quickly take down that group of hunters with minimal damage to themselves. And that was awesome because you really felt, the players really felt, like they were vampires, like they were powerful creatures. So it just makes them, it fills them with this sense of domination over the human prey that they're stalking, right? Which is great because that feeds in so perfectly with the true theme of this game, which is where the hunger dice come in. The true theme of this game, and certainly of my game, is the constant battle of the vampire between humanity and the beast. That which makes you human and that which threatens to pull you into the maelstrom of total vampiric beasthood, where now you're just this ravenous creature. And it's always about that struggle because you want to retain your humanity for as long as possible before you go too far. And the way the game does it is through its mechanics. And that's why I think it's so brilliant. In Vampire the Requiem, when you wanted to use a vampiric power, it cost you blood, right? It basically, you was tracked in blood points. That's fine, it works, it's serviceable. But in V5, you have hunger, and the hunger goes from 0 to 5. And what that means is the more hungry you are, the more of your dice in whatever given skill pool you're rolling, you must replace with a hunger dice of that value. So if you've got hunger 3 and you're rolling a pool of 7 dice, then 3 of those 7 dice must be composed of hunger dice. So you're rolling 4 regular dice and 3 hunger dice. Now, why is that important? It's important because when you roll a critical, which is double zeros in this game, when you roll a critical using the hunger dice, you have something called a messy critical, which means, yes, you succeeded what you want, but you succeed because the beast takes over. And it's called a messy crit, which means that not only do you succeed, you do something quite awful. The beast is in control at that point. And there's many ways to sort of mitigate that and describe it, many little mechanical variances you can use in the game to sort of represent that, and it's super cool. Or if you have a critical failure, a bestial failure is what they call it. So if you fail the skill outright, but one of your hunger dice shows a 1, that means not only did you fail, but the beast is enraged that you fail and it takes over. So it's this constant struggle to maintain your humanity with this ever-encroaching beast. And every time you use a discipline, use a vampiric special ability or power, you have to do a rouse check. And what that means is you're rousing your blood. The power always works. Always, which is great. But the only question is, do you become more hungry when you use the power? So when you use a power, you roll a rouse check, which is a simple D10. And if you get 6 to 10, it's fine. But if you get 5 or less, the power works, but you become more hungry and your hunger level goes up, which means anything you do from that point on runs the risk of incurring the wrath of the beast. And of course, the only way to get hunger down is to feed on typically human blood. So that's the basic kind of theme. It's a very street level game. This game sort of implicitly applies that you're playing newish vampires, right? Nothing too powerful, not the old, what do they call them? Antediluvians or Methuselahs or whatever. Again, that's lore parlance that I really have no truck with. Yeah, so this isn't a game where you play super ancient, awesome, powerful vampires. That's not that game. As far as I know, like V20, which is a version of the vampire game, can facilitate that, but not this one, which is perfectly fine for my purposes, because I like the playing out of new vampires. In fact, what I did, and I don't think this is in any way unique, but what I did was my players, my three players here in town, they had never played vampire before. So they didn't know anything about it. So when we started the game, I started them on the night of the embrace, and I specifically told them to don't read the rules. I explained the basic mechanics of them, the basic dice pool mechanics, and that's it. And then they were embraced. And suddenly they're thrust into this world at the same time the characters are. So the players knew as little about what was going on as the characters did, and it was awesome because the players learned at the same time as the characters did, and it's just been so great. You can only pull that trick once with a group, right? Obviously, but it worked really well in this case. So this game that I'm running, as I said, it's this hybrid between Masquerade and Requiem, but it really does perfectly encapsulate that constant battle between the human in the vampire and the beast in the vampire. And it really plays out mechanically really well. So I know a lot of old Vampire the Masquerade players really hate the hunger dice mechanic for various reasons. Again, I don't particularly care. I have no knowledge of the old games. I don't care. But I think it's fantastic. In fact, I think it's kind of a genius way to demonstrate the power of vampires and for there to be a cost to your vampiric powers without having to roll to see if they succeed. That's what I really love, because the vampires feel powerful, they feel competent. Now, within the World of Darkness, there's all the other what they call splats, right? Which is mages and werewolves and such. I don't really like to mix and match so much. I know a lot of other World of Darkness games do that, where if you're a vampire, you could run into a mage or a werewolf or what have you. My game is far more pure than that. My game is pretty much just vampires. They hear about other things out there, but they don't really know, and like they've never run into anything else, and they probably never will, because those things probably don't exist. Unless maybe they do. We'll see. Some of my players watch this video, so I'm not going to say anything too specific. But a Vampire the Masquerade, I think, is a really well-designed system when it comes to illustrating what the game is trying to do. Now, one of the problems with the game is its organization. Ooh, it's bad. It's bad. There are rules for different things scattered throughout the entire book. If you're trying to find out how to stake a vampire in combat, for example, you have to look at like 3 different places in the book, at least 2 different places in the book, to find out exactly what you need to do in order to do that, and they're not obvious. It's not like, oh, there's the combat section. Oh, and there's all the rules you need to know. It's not written out like that at all. So it's quite frustrating. You have to know the book backwards and forwards in order to know exactly how to get to the thing you're looking for. So that's a frustration. The thing I really like to, in terms of combat, I should want to touch on this. There's no initiative with the bog standard system in the game. Everything happens simultaneously. And I love that. That's very, very odd for a lot of old school gamers who we're so used to initiative. You roll initiative and then everybody goes on their turn. That doesn't happen. Basically what happens is everybody says what they're going to do. The GM assigns the appropriate dice pool, everybody rolls, and you count successes. And whoever gets more gets what they want, is basically how it works. It's great, and it's tense, and you have to be sort of Johnny on the spot when it comes to figuring out who's where. In a combat situation in the game, I always sort of do a little sketch of where people are. You don't need a battle mat or anything like that. You don't need all that kind of stuff. It's largely theater of the mind. But you still need to have a handle on who's dealing with what, because it can get a little confusing because you don't have that initiative structure. But once you get used to it, I just love it because it's, again, like the stat and skill fluidity, so too do you have fluidity within the conflict scenarios. However, that said, this game really isn't about physical combat, at least mine isn't. It happens, but this game is more about finding your way as a vampire, and that means trying to climb the political rungs of the society and find your place within it, or perhaps try and overthrow it, or whatever the case may be. It's a game about factions and double dealings and backstabbing and backroom deals and all this kind of stuff. At the same time, these crazy supernatural events are happening just underneath them, threatening to screw up their whole world. So it's always a pressure cooker. You're always trying to, in my game, we're always trying to pit the characters against all these different obstacles to really make them tense and really make them choose how they're going to deal with things. And of course, they must engage with the mechanics. And because the hunger dice is such a prevalent mechanic, that means you get crazy things happening all the time when the character snaps and they get a messy critical or something. And that just advances the narrative. It advances the story, basically, because I never know what's going to happen. I never know what's going to happen in this game. And that is exactly the kind of game that I love to run. I love not knowing. And this game completely facilitates that. So, if you like playing monsters, if you like playing terrible creatures that are always on the brink of doing terrible, terrible things, and maybe you don't want that to happen, if you want to have cool powers, but you don't want to be like a superhero with fangs, then Vampire the Masquerade is a great game to explore. If you like the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, I have no opinion on that. I can't even begin to speak to it. I just know that you don't need to use the lore in order to make the rules work. That is borne out over the past year of playing the game. It's a lot of fun, and I never thought I'd run a vampire game. It just always seemed weird. Like I'm thinking back to when I thought of a vampire back in the 90s. Oh, those weird goth kids. But apparently now I'm one of the weird goth kids. Huzzah. I guess I've leveled up. Anyway, Vampire the Masquerade will always have a sacred place here on the shelves of the Sage's Library. Thank you so much for joining. And if you do want to help support the show, please do hit like and subscribe, or consider helping us out through the links in the description below. Until next time, my friends, I am Trevor DeVal, and we will see you on the next Sage's Library.